Good evening and welcome to our seminar on the food information regulations and allergens. My name is Steve Pepper, I'm a food safety trainer, and tonight I've got with me, looking after the questions and answers, Mark Williams. Mark, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So, my name is Mark Williams. I'm an environmental health officer and I work in the private sector. I specialise in housing and I run a website called theehp.com.
Okay, thanks very much for coming along and volunteering to look after the questions. If anyone has any questions that's watching, if you want to write them up on the Q&A app, if you know how to do that, but it's on the top left-hand side of your screen. Just hover your mouse over it, press it, and send us a question. We'll try our best to answer it. But please, if you leave it until we've finished the presentation. I'm delighted to have with me tonight David Newsum. We haven't got him on screen yet, we've got his PowerPoint first slide up. But David, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I can. I'm in Manchester, it's sunny, I'm a freelance food safety trainer, and I've got a chai latte, and I hope that you can't see me drinking that. I'm ready to roll.
Okay, right David, after you.
Well, welcome however many people are listening to this. I'm going to be as brief as I can to outline the prospect for the new food information regulations this year, and particularly the implications for the catering industry. So this is very experimental for me, so bear with me, and no doubt Steve will shout at me if I do something wrong. I feel the need to put a disclaimer here to say that whatever we all would like in this situation, the regulations have not yet been laid. So as of today, we're only saying what we think the regulations will have in them, and that's probably one of the reasons why local authorities are not going big on the information for food businesses. These regulations should be laid early July. So we think we know roughly what's in, but we can't be absolutely guaranteed. I always like to start with why the new law is being introduced, and maybe some of our listeners actually are allergy sufferers, but around 2 million people in the UK have a problem with food allergies, and there are some well-publicised instances of actual fatality, rare though they are. And unsurprisingly or surprisingly, the commonest cause and the common cause is a customer eating food that they didn't think had an allergen in, which turned out to have it in, and that's what these food information regulations are all about. So as of December the 13th, deadline date, all food displayed or served needs to have accurate information, either written down or given verbally. And specifically, the customer must know information about the 14 allergens that are designated in the upcoming regulations. From a food business point of view, if they don't do this properly, they're going to be in trouble, especially if somebody's made ill. And for the food businesses that don't know too much about this, we need to remind them it's not just about nuts and peanuts. There are actually a total of 14 allergens that are going to be described in the regulations. Now, whether you can see the detail or not in here, the 14 allergens are getting quite well known and are listed in the prospective regulations. It's fair to say there are around 200 or so known food allergens. These are the 14 that are commonest in causing problems on severity across the whole of the European community, and that's why they've come into the European-driven regulations. From a regulator's role, that's to me and you as the environmental health officers or the trading standards officers or food safety enforcement officers, they do have, and I do work with them, a very simple objective when this all comes about. Making sure businesses know their obligation and the advantage of complying with the law, making sure they know what the actual requirement is, and understanding how they might move towards compliance. Now, the regulators have a range of tools and have been using these for a number of years. It isn't just come in and prosecute people. There are a variety of different types of interventions, as they say, that they can use. And you, whether you're a consultant or you're running a food business, you just expect to see a targeted intervention depending on the lack of compliance in a particular food business, and these kind of interventions have been used for many years. They're not new by any means. Some questions some businesses ask us, well, can't I just say may contain XX? And the regulations don't prohibit the use of these advisory warnings, but they do require that the allergens that are in the ingredients are listed in the ingredients. So the may contain phrase is a bit of a red herring, really. The business has to make sure its ingredients are properly described. And then if it wants to say they're not too sure whether allergens might get in accidentally through cross-contamination, they can say that as well, but not instead of. So what's a food business got to do about it? It's incredibly simple requirement. The fact that it's causing some food businesses to do a lot of work doesn't mean it is a complex requirement. You need to tell your customers how to get the information from you about allergens, which means you need a sign somewhere visible or in the menu. And you need to have that information about every product that you produce, about which allergens are in it. If you feel that in a catering industry you can give that information better verbally, that is an option, and you can train your staff and your chef to be able to do that. But whatever happens, the business must provide information that's accurate, up to date, and verifiable. To us working consultancy, it sounds like a simple process. Check the ingredients you use for all the 14 allergens, check all your recipes, work out which allergens are in which meal items, and decide how you keep the information. I'm not belying the fact that that might be a long job for some businesses. As far as enforcement's concerned, as I mentioned before, it's local authorities who will enforce this, probably jointly environmental health officers and trading standards officers and others. We would expect advice and assistance to be given from the 13th of December. In serious cases, there will be warnings, letters, and a specific type of improvement notice for serious situations, giving the business a specific time to put things right. And if that notice were not to be complied with, that would create a further offence. And there will be the opportunity for a direct offence and prosecution and fines, just the same as the food hygiene requirements. For those who are watching this short hangout before we get into conversations now, there's a very good e-learning module free of charge on the Food Standards Agency's website. And those of us who've gone through it have found it very useful to give us the basics. And that's been designed for enforcement officers, but the Food Standards Agency welcome other people looking at it as well. Now that's intentionally a very quick overview, because the requirement is fairly straightforward. What I think our discussions will be about, not just tonight in this hangout but beyond, will be some of the ways in which businesses are trying to deal with the requirement using different techniques and different approaches. This is goal-setting legislation. It simply requires the end result that the information is there. It doesn't prescribe the way in which the business does it. And that's the little pitch I wanted to make tonight, Steve. I'll try to do it fairly quickly, and I think you tell me now if I shut my PowerPoint down, I'll be able to get back online with my webcam. Is that right?
Yeah, that's fine. That'd be great to see you face, David. If anyone out there who's watching wants to ask a question, then this guy is the one that's going to read them. So I don't know if anyone has, if you know how to do it. This is Mark. Mark, while you're, have you got anything up on screen yet?
No questions as yet there.
Oh, everyone knows all about it, and we're all fine. That's great. What I'm going to do now, as a sort of an ex-caterer, I quite often find that people in the catering industry in particular, I think in the food manufacturing industry they do understand, but in the food catering industry, people don't often understand how serious anaphylaxis and these sort of allergic reactions are. And I dug this video out. It's a 1-minute medical school video. It is American, but it really brings home to me what anaphylaxis is all about.
A viewer asks, what is anaphylaxis? Let's have a look. Anaphylaxis is a total body allergic reaction in contrast to a localized reaction. There seem to be certain kinds of allergens which trigger anaphylactic reactions. These are abbreviated FIDL, which stands for foods, insect stings, drugs, and latex. These lead to massive mast cell releases of histamine, which get carried in the blood throughout the entire body. Now, why these reactions are generalized is poorly understood, actually, but we do know the results. First of all, you get leakage of fluid from blood into your tissues. Up to half can be lost in 10 minutes, leading to massive blood pressure drops. Next is edema, which is swelling from all that leaky fluid. In particular, the larynx can swell and cut off your airway. Next, smooth muscle spasm leads to wheezing in your lungs. The result of all this is shock, and anaphylaxis can be rapidly fatal.
Yeah, brings it home, doesn't it? Welcome, David. You're there. You're on screen now. I'm just going to delete mine. So, any thoughts on that video and what message it brings to?
Well, you know, I think we all, if we're honest, Steve, we've all got to say we need to learn more about it. I mean.
Oh, sorry, David. Your mic chat sounds a bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think it sounds a bit. Can you hear that, Steve?
It sounds a bit crackly, but I think we'll just carry on and be fine.
Okay.
Right, is it better if I speak up, Mark? Is that better?
Yeah, carry on. It's fine. Yeah.
I think if we're honest, most of us have got to be honest and say we need to find out more about this. I think the food information regulations requirement is simple. But the more we know about not just anaphylaxis but other allergic reactions, the better we're to explain to businesses why it's so important. Because although a business will say, oh, there's not a European regulation, something else I've got to do, if they understand the effect on their business, if they treat the customer who otherwise they would treat well in hygiene-wise, treat badly allergen-wise, then they're actually in danger of losing business.
Yeah, I mean, as an ex-caterer, I used to be a chef many years ago, and I worked as a catering manager in the NHS some 20 years ago before I went into delivering food hygiene on a full-time basis. But basically, my experience with NHS chefs and chefs in the private sector and the voluntary sector is that there are two things. One is that they don't like to follow standard recipes. Every chef that I've ever known wants to be the best, and they want to stick in all their little ingredients. Oh, well, mine's a better meal than my colleagues, and I add a few secret ingredients in. And that always worries me when you talk about allergens. The second thing is that people don't read the labels. I don't know many people in the catering industry, unless they've got a particular allergen themselves or their clients, like in maybe a nursery, for example, a hospital or a school. Most people in your average restaurant probably don't bother to read the labels that well, and they're going to have to learn to do it. I'll give you a case in point. Here are two, well, one's a very well-known brand of soup. That's Heinz tomato ketchup soup. No, Heinz tomato soup, not tomato ketchup. And that one contains gluten in wheat flour. This one is made by Lidl. This is their Newgate brand of vegetable soup. Same basically sort of soup, but this one actually contains an extra allergen. This one has celery on it. So if you've got someone who's allergic to celery, and you've been feeding them on something like this, which is a pre-packed food, and you suddenly run out of your Heinz tomato soup and you go on to a different brand, then you've got a totally different product. A lot of people don't realise that common foods are allergens. Mustard, for example, in all its forms. Some people can have an anaphylactic type reaction to having mustard on or in the food. And it's often used to enhance dishes. Some people don't realise that most nuts and other products can be turned into oil. And I'm sure you've all seen sesame oil, but how many people have fried chips in groundnut oil? Groundnut oil is another word for peanut oil. The Americans call them groundnuts. And then
certainly, Steve, an ingredient under the regulations. And I think a lot of businesses would not regard the cooking oil as an ingredient in their language, but it is an ingredient because it's an intentional contributor to the food. So it's like the fourth road bridge in a way, isn't it, for a food business? Everywhere they turn, we're saying, read the label, read the label, read the label. And poor old chef opens his dry store and says, well, who's going to give me 3 hours extra a day to read all the labels? But I think it is about taking it step by step. I do hope that December the 13th isn't some ridiculous day when our enforcement colleagues are made to go out in droves trying to seek compliance. That day is not magical. It's simply the step when the pressure is put on for businesses. Right.
I've just got a question. I mean, I'm not a foodie, but I was wondering, in terms of how does this all work in practice? In terms of, if I've got a small food business, I work all the hours God sends. I mean, how do I, as a small business operator who maybe doesn't use the internet much, how do I actually become aware of these sort of changes?
Well, just remember the regulations haven't been laid yet. So when the regulations are laid, and the Food Standards Agency will initiate a promotional campaign, using social media and using leaflets, etc., by our local authorities. So let's assume the regulations are laid, say, early July, and there's no significant change from what we think is going to happen. Then we've got July to December for the promotional campaign. But I think you hit the nail on the head. All the information in the world doesn't help that poor small business generate more hours in the day to go and start to go through all their products. And I think every business will have to have a different solution. I mean, for some businesses, like you mentioned, Steve, it's the prize. Some businesses will start to eliminate using certain products to try and keep the number of allergens down. They'll decide not to use mustard or something. They'll use something else instead.
Yeah. The thing that worries me is that when they run out of something on a weekend and the manager isn't there or the boss isn't there, and they slip out of the corner shop and buy a similar product. So, you might, let's say, for someone puts on the stir fry and they put on, this one which contains certain allergens, this one that contains a different one. And it's where they substitute. It's a bit like caution cleaning materials. When they run out of cleaning materials, they go to the corner shop, buy a box of bleach or whatever it is that they're using, and it looks the same, but it's only when you read the label that the contents are different. That's really scary. I mean, I've done, or I've tried to do, a couple of fact sheets, which if anyone who is watching wants them, they're free. I just send them out by email. They may give you some clues. It will list what the allergens are. It will tell you a little bit how to deal with it. I've also been trying to develop some resources, and a printer friend of mine has manufactured these. Now, I'm not selling printer menu pads, but this printer has done this, and at the top of here is put a message for the waiter or waitress front of house to say, I'm ready to take your order. Could I just ask, has anyone got any allergens that we need to know about so I can tell chef? And if anyone says yes, then there's a little card that the customer can fill out and say, yes, I'm allergic to this, and it would make me very ill. So the chef can have that, check what's on his menu, and that might help someone who's got a menu order passes. It will help a business that's got a counter service or a retail shop, but it will help someone in a restaurant or a hotel type scenario.
I just had another practical question on this as well. I mean, I have a small business myself, and it's not a food business, but I'm in the process of having some new labels designed for a new product we're launching. And from that, I mean, it's a big eye opener for me. I didn't realise how much it cost to have labels designed and printed.
Yeah.
And we're not talking, you might, I mean, you can't really say, I want 50 labels of this and 50. I mean, you're talking, to make it cost effective, you're talking thousands of labels you really need to print, which costs, in some cases, depending on the side of the business, it could be talking hundreds or even thousands of pounds. I mean, what if I've got, the legislation comes in, I've got 2,000 or 10,000 labels left of which I think, well, I spent all this money on these labels. I don't want to bin them now just because someone who I don't know decided to change the legislation. I mean, how does that work for a food business?
The food information, the information for consumers regulation has been out for 3 years, which is the European regulation, the directive that says this is going to happen. In food manufacturing, which I think is the situation you're probably relating to, manufacturers have been doing this for a couple of years anyway. So there is that sort of long lead-in time to that. In terms of caterers, I think this is why, Mark. I don't think labelling is going to work for many caterers, as opposed to reprinting their menus every now and again. That's why the national derogation for us in the UK has been to allow the information to be given verbally.
Right.
Just because I think what Steve said. Steve said, it's Friday night, they've run out of X, they run down to the local supermarket and buy Y. Now, they're not going to reprint the menu for the evening. but the chef can say, we've used this and we've used that. And what you're seeing is, despite the implausibility of it working in practice, that's what happens now. The situation we're describing, when chefs or managers don't know what's in the food, is what we have now. And allergy sufferers are sadly used to either taking that risk or avoiding foods or certain places. So what I'm hoping that from December the 13th all through next year and the year after, the situation just gets better for allergy sufferers.
Sorry, I've got another question. I've got all these questions. I mean, I'm not an allergy sufferer myself, and I don't know. Actually, I don't think I know any allergy sufferers. I mean, is it sort of? I mean, is this just sort of a thing that affects a few people, or is it sort of quite a widespread?
2 million in the UK.
How many is that? 2 million.
2 million allergy sufferers in the UK.
Wow.
Out of what, 60-something million, so it's 1 in 30. Do you know anybody who's lactose intolerant? Anybody who can't eat dairy?
I can't drink too much full-fat milk, I can tell you that.
Well, I'm not saying you. I'm not saying it's you. I'm just saying have you ever said anybody, oh, I can't drink, I can't...
Yeah, I guess, yeah, no, seriously, yeah, I guess.
Sometimes it's eggs. Or somebody who thinks they're allergic to shellfish. That's the other common one. And of course, you know about nuts and peanuts. So you probably do know somebody who had an allergy. It's just that they've never needed to tell you about it.
Right. Well, you actually do know someone's got an allergy, because that was my arm last year.
Wow.
After I had sorrel in the garden. I picked it up. I had my t-shirts on, my gloves. I took it to the compost heap, and I went to wash my hands and my arms. The following morning, I was covered in hives. And now that I've been sensitized to it, I don't eat sorrel, so I'm very, very careful about what's in any mixed salad. We went abroad to France the other week, and there was this soup on the menu. It looked fantastic. And when I got the translator out, it was sorrel garnish soup. And I froze that I'd nearly ordered it. And if I hadn't had my dictionary with me, God only knows what happened, because I don't have a pin or anything, because it's not something that's a normal ingredient. It's also not listed on the 14 ingredients, so it's not officially classed as an allergen, but I'm allergic to it, and that's not an intolerance. I've now got a full-blown allergy to that.
Yeah, I mean, there are about 200 sort of well-known allergies and sensitivities. And my wife, if she's not here, so I won't mention her by name, we think she's got a sulfite sensitivity. Sadly for her, you get a lot of sulfites in alcohol, and it's not always declared on the label, because it's often less than the 10 parts per million required for declaration. But she's hypersensitive, so she daren't drink any alcohol at all. And when she has done, by accident, she's come up with hives, and we've had her off to A&E 3 times. So that's really tricky, isn't it? Because even if you ask. But what's interesting, and Mark, I think we can all do this, is you go to a restaurant and you just innocently ask, do you have an allergen menu? The range of responses you get is interesting. But what I think it does show is that food businesses can do it. You know, I've been to places where they said right at the beginning, now, has anybody got any allergen in the party? I'm giving 5 out of 5 for allergen stuff, because for a food business to start off with that menu pad, like Steve showed and said, now I'm making note of allergies, gives you a lot of confidence. Mm-hmm. It's not a guarantee that they made a mistake, but it's a guarantee they're doing the best they can.
Yeah. The other thing, I mentioned wines, David, and one of the things that certain wine producers use is for finings. And a lot of the finings either contain traces of fish or traces of egg.
Oh, right.
Both of which are allergens. So not well known, but certainly small producers of wine. Yeah. And abroad, they don't have to declare, because it's an ingredient, but it has been contaminated. Mark, just to show you on here, that's what manufacturers now have to do. Wait a minute, I've not put it on the screen. Can you see that now? They've got to list all their ingredients, starting with the heaviest down to the lightest. And if any of them are an allergen, they've got to put what the allergen is. So wheat flour, it would be wheat, which is the allergen, which is obviously gluten. or cream, which is dairy. And if it doesn't say what it is, that it's not recognised by the natural name, they will put in brackets afterwards. So vegetable oil, they put sunflower in that example. And they may also put on it, I keep clicking the wrong screen here, they may also put on it this elsewhere, but that's really only if they are preparing both types of foods in the same building, and there's maybe a possibility, maybe by poor hand washing or not an adequate cleaning and disinfection system where they're not got adequate separation.
Yeah,
but
right.
you can't hide behind, well, it might contain nuts.
They can say we have had some people who missed the point on this, despite best explanations, saying, "I'll just put may contain all 14 allergens." And I say, "You're welcome to say that, but that's the law isn't interested in that. What the law is interested in is what have you put in it."
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, David, just a quick thing. I think just try plugging your mic out and plugging it back in, because sometimes that sorts out the interference issue you've got going at the moment.
How's that? Can you hear it all now?
No, it's still there. Never mind. It's not terrible. It's not that bad.
No, but we'll have to improve all these things, because now, well, can you still hear me?
Yes, can you?
I'm now not using the headset mic. I'm using the mic in the webcam.
It's possibly a connection thing, David. It may well be okay. It looks like we've got several viewers, and I've not seen anyone type in any questions, but it may well be that they haven't enabled the Q&A. Again, to enable the Q&A, you put your mouse up to the left of the screen, hover over it, and there's a thing called Q&A, and that will bring up a sort of a drop-down menu, and you'll be able to type in the bottom.
Can I ask a question again? Sorry.
Yes.
I mean, like I say, I'm a small businessman, and I always think about what happens to these people who just, I don't know, for example, like I said, I attend a few craft fairs every now and again, and what I tend to see is people making jams. They make a range of different things, and what I see a lot of these people do is just starting out. They'll be printing all their labels and whatnot from home. I mean, what is a situation, or what's a likely situation if you have someone like that and they don't label their products properly? I mean, what sort of things can actually happen to those people? I mean, how bad can it get?
Well, the trading standards officers have been well practiced, because I think if you're talking about jams and whatever, I'm trying to...
Any products really, just even like little cake.
I'm not thinking of... Oh, well, fair enough. I think the trading standards officers have been doing this for years, and of course, you take into account the size of the business and whether it's intentional or not, and what the risk is, and then you offer them a way forward, which is, look, you've got a load of labels left. It's not a serious breach, so why don't you use them up? And we'll give you 2 months to get your act in order. On the other hand, if it's something which is badly labelled, they could even seize the product. And this thing about the what's called inconsistency in enforcement is actually better described as flexibility.
Right.
I did 20 years as enforcement, and when you go into a business, after a while you get cute, and what you work out is, what's the thing I can do to this business that will have the best impact when I go out the door? And sometimes you have to say to yourself, I'm taking all this food because I don't trust the business. And other times you have an hour's conversation with them, and you absolutely trust that they understand what they need to do, and you can leave them alone for a couple of months. Mm-hmm. I think that's what regulators now are skilled in doing. They measure up the risk. That's the obvious thing. They look at what interventions are available, and then what I always describe as they inspect the brain of the proprietor, and they work out, how can I go away where they're saying he was firm but he was fair? Because that's the best result, because they're then likely to comply. There's nothing worse than going back 3, 6, 9 months later and finding exactly the same situation. And as a regulator, you've got to understand that whilst you can hammer them again and serve a notice again, you let them not comply for 9 months and exposing the public to a risk that you thought they'd sorted. So that's why we get these stories about different authorities and different inspectors doing different things. It's because of the reaction from the proprietor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that, David. The other thing is, I think that it's incumbent upon people like ourselves, certainly for David and myself, to provide things like this broadcast tonight, which will be saved to YouTube so other people see it, to educate people, to provide things like the free fact sheets that I've done. Yes, it takes me a few minutes to write them up, and if people like what they're seeing, it's helped them, then they might come back and go on one of David's courses, or go on one of my courses, or support us in other ways. But I think that it is incumbent on us to help people, especially the smaller one-man bands who, they need all the help they can get.
Well, I would agree, Steve, and I think this doesn't just apply to food safety, Mark. It applies to your area as well. We're trying to, despite what people will say about the government of the day is doing this and doing that, it's incumbent upon professionals to work with businesses and collaborate more. And I think it also means you've got to sometimes compromise what you think is the ideal solution and go for the solution the business offers up to you. So, when I ask the business, this is what you're required to do, how do you think you might be able to achieve it? Rather than, why haven't you done X, Y, and Z? We'll be a lot better off. Now, it must be the same kind of thing you do in your work with landlords, etc. Let them suggest to you how they're going to improve the situation. And if it feels okay to us, support them in it.
Yeah, well, you'll start off with a groundwork of a position where you say this is the ideal. Then if they, like you say, if they can come up with something which is just as good, then that's always been okay. But I did have one more question. The enforcing authority, who is the actual enforcing authority for this sort of? Is it trading standards?
Look, it's the local authority.
Right. I mean, which is it like a trading standards issue or environmental health issue?
That will be determined locally.
Right.
Because both environmental health practitioners, trading standards officers, and food safety enforcement officers are all competent to apply this legislation.
Okay.
So it will be local discussions. For example, in some premises, they might go hand in hand. Or an EHO might go in and say, I think I need a bit of trading standards expertise here. So that's all to be worked out in the detail between now and December. And there's no doubt some local authorities will send in what they call business compliance officers. But not necessarily qualified in the legislation, but do an assessment.
Yeah.
Go in and say, look, how are you getting on with this? What are you doing? Do you need some help and so on? So it won't always be an authorised officer. It might be someone's gathering intelligence, and that's the way the regulations are working nowadays.
Right, well, we've been just over half an hour, so I'd like to thank the two of you for being on. I'd like to thank the people who watched this live, and for the people who may be watching this in the future. If anyone's got any queries or questions or comments, for me, my contact details, simply Google Steve Pepper. You get my website, my contact details there. Mark, for you?
My email address is mark@theehp.com.
Okay, thank you. And David?
You can find me by Googling the Creative Trainer.
The Creative Trainer.
I hope.
Anyway, guys, thank you very much. We'll stop the broadcast now. We'll put everything put up online, and then we can put it on our websites and let everyone do it. What I'm going to try and do is set up something like this on a regular monthly basis. Details to be worked out, but something like the first Tuesday in the month or whatever, and we'll be letting people know from there. So, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.